Welcome to Brother Miller's Book of Mormon Notes. Today, we're going to discuss a little bit about 1 Nephi 11 through 14. At the end of chapter 10, Nephi expresses his desire to see what his father Lehi had seen. He wants to be able to understand it as well. He desires to know, he believes that he can know, and he's pondering quite a bit about it. In chapter 11, verse 1, he says, "For it came to pass that I had desired to know the things that my father had seen, and believing that the Lord was able to make them known unto me, as I sat pondering in my heart." One of the things I shared in the last video was President Nelson's encouragement for us to do the same thing. To desire to know for ourselves, to believe that God will tell us too, and there has to be that pondering aspect. President Nelson said, "I urge you to stretch beyond your current spiritual ability to receive personal revelation. For the Lord has promised that if thou shalt seek, thou shalt receive revelation upon revelation, knowledge upon knowledge, that thou mayest know the mysteries and the peaceable things which bringeth joy, that which bringeth life eternal." Oh, there's so much more that your Father in heaven wants you to know. We can believe that God will let us know the same things that He's let other prophets know too, that we can understand. In this case, Father Lehi's vision. We also need to ponder the things that we've been taught, the things that Father Lehi teaches, the things that Nephi will teach us. I love this quote by President Hinckley. "You need time to meditate and ponder, to think, to wonder at the great plan of happiness that the Lord has outlined for His children. You need to read the Scriptures. You need to read good literature. You need to partake of the great culture which is available to all of us. I heard President David O. McKay say to members of the 12 on one occasion, 'Brethren, we do not spend enough time meditating. I believe that with all my heart. Our lives become extremely busy. We run from one thing to another. We wear ourselves out in thoughtless pursuits of goals, which are highly ephemeral, or in other words, fleeting, momentary. We are entitled to spend some time with ourselves in introspection, in development.'" Today, I hope, is a little bit of a theme. We today will together have a desire to know, believe that God will help us understand these things and reveal them to us, and maybe spend a little bit of time pondering of these truths. Last time we started a little bit, in chapter 8, a description of the fruit of the tree of life. In verse 10, it's noted that it makes you happy. It's not just sweet in verse 11. It is really, really sweet. It's not just white, it's whiter than anything else. It's not just desirable, it's most desirable. It's not just beautiful in chapter 11. 11 verse 8, it is very beautiful, extremely beautiful, beautiful far beyond, exceeding all beauty. Verse 9, it's not just precious, it's precious above all. In verse 22, there's kind of a summary. The love of God is most desirable above all things. And then, now these are Nephi's notes, but the angel wants to add one more. He adds, it's most joyous to the soul. And as a summary in chapter 15, it is considered the greatest of all the gifts of God. There's a lot of time spent in Nephi's dream and Father Lehi's dream to make sure that we understand that you have to believe that there's nothing greater than God's love. What He does for us, what He shows, how He shows His love for us, how He helps us feel His love. If you seem to think that there's something, or someone seems to think there's something in the great and spacious building that is greater than, more precious than God's love, the great and spacious building may entice you away from God's love. If you think that there's something better, you may be susceptible to leave the rod of iron, let go, and not taste of the fruit of God's love in your life today. I'd encourage you to teach this. Testify to others. Here's how today I have felt God's love. Here's how I see God's love in my life. Here's how I see God showing that to others. And in your families, share that with each other. There is something very sweet that makes you happy when you feel God's love. It is desirable. It's beautiful. It's precious to us. It really is a great, even the greatest gift that God's given us. And maybe one other thing, at this time is a great time to pause. You could teach your families this. There's a great tie-in to Alma 32. In Alma 32, there is a seed that is planted. That seed grows into a tree. And in verse 28, we compare the word to the seed. Now, if you give place, that seed may be planted in your heart. There's a process after verse 28 where it grows in your heart, and its byproduct is it increases your faith. It blesses you as it grows in your heart. And then in verses 40 to 43, he tells you what the fruit of this tree is. I'd encourage you to read through it and study it, because in verse 41, it is a tree that springs up into everlasting life. In verse 42, he uses the same words that Father Lehi and Nephi have used. The fruit of this that you receive by your diligence is, verse 42, most precious. Now you've heard that before, right? That's chapter 11, verse 9. Sweet above all that is sweet. That's chapter 8, verse 11. White above all that is white. That's chapter 8, verse 11. Pure above all that is pure. And ye shall feast upon this fruit even until you are filled and hunger not, neither shall you thirst. Then ye shall reap the rewards of your faith, your diligence, your patience, your long-suffering, waiting for the tree to bring forth fruit unto you. Sometimes you do have to wait and be patient until you feel God's love. But one day, and that can be today, you can taste God's love. You can continue in the path that God has led. Now the next, or just as kind of a summary to build on to chapters 11, 12, 13, and 14. There are a few major symbols, and maybe you do more, but major symbols in Lehi and now Nephi's dream. Some of them are, you got the rod of iron. That's the word of God. Its purpose is it's on the banks, or one of its purposes is on the banks of the river. It does keep you out of the river. You need to make sure you're on one side of the rod, because its purpose there is to protect you from falling into the murky and dirty river of filth. It does lead to the tree of life. The Word of God leads to God's love. And it keeps you on the straight and narrow. Another major symbol is the tree of itself. We've spent a little time about the love of God. Another major symbol is the mist of darkness. They are, in verse 17, defined as the temptations of the devil and things that harden your heart. Now, I'd also add that those mists hide things. It wants to hide the tree of life. It wants to hide the love of God. It hides danger. It's also going to hide that the foundation of the great and spacious building is missing. There's nothing there. It wants to hide you and separate you from God's love. And then also, great and spacious building, the vain imaginations, and the pride of the world. Now, these major symbols are going to be repeated 3 different times in 3 different ways, and the angel is going to teach Nephi about these major symbols. So in chapter 11, he's going to give examples. Number 1, I'm going to give you an example of the Jewish people. Here's how the Word of God came to them. He's going to give examples of John the Baptist and Christ and the apostles. And there's going to be more, but I'd encourage you in your personal study or in your family study to write these things out. Put these major symbols. If you want another one, great. But then look for examples. Look for examples of how the love of God is shown to each of these groups. So chapter 11, you have Mary and Christ. There's more. You'll see them. Then the mists of darkness. How are they displayed? The mist of darkness, they are displayed by the fighting against the apostles, as among other things. You'll see the great and spacious building there. And you'll see the pride of the great and spacious building. And I do have to say, there's one thing that I think the angel is quite sarcastic when he says, because they're fighting against the apostles. They're fighting against Christ. They're trying to obscure the love of God in the life. And then he just says, this is verse 35, and the angel of the Lord spake unto me again, saying, and I could just picture this full of sarcasm, behold the world and the wisdom thereof. There's not a lot of wisdom when you're trying to separate someone from the love of God. So you want to pay attention to some of the things that he talks about with, here's examples of the great and spacious building. Second example is in chapter 12. It is of the Nephites. Now, I'll let you look through this, but there are examples of how the word of God comes to the Nephites. There's examples how the love of God is shown in the Nephite's life. There's examples of the midst of darkness, one of which is war. The mists of darkness represent some of those things that lead you to misery, lead you to hell. And one of the great quotes that is very simple that we've probably all heard, war is hell. There's also examples of the great and spacious building. Now, in the next couple chapters, 13 and 14, it's focused on the Gentiles. And once again, Nephi is going to be shown by the angel. All right, here's examples of the word of God, how it's going to come to the Gentiles. Here's how they're going to see the love of God. Here's how the mists of darkness are going to be employed in their lives. Here's examples of the great and spacious building. At the end of those examples, it is a sweet experience to stop and say, okay, now, example number 4 is me. How am I getting the word of God today in my life? Today, how am I feeling God's love? What are some examples of God's love in your life in the last week, month, year? You may even go back a year or two where there was a profound example where God's love for you. There's nothing you want to have separate you from God's love. You feel it. It is sweet. It's precious. It's delicious. It is a great, even the greatest of all gifts. You can spend a little time, because we all see these. We see their influences, the mists of darkness in our life, those temptations of the devil that are trying to harden your heart or a friend's heart or a loved one's heart. What is it today that's hiding the tree of life from you? What is the apostles, what is the prophet saying today that's going to identify those mists of darkness and take them away? What is the word of God helping you to overcome? How is it helping you to overcome those mists of darkness? And you'll be able to see some of those vain imaginations in the world today and some of that pride. That can be a really sweet experience as you discuss that as a group of friends, or maybe text that to somebody. Here's today how I felt God's love. And it relates to this part in these chapters 11, 12, 13, and 14. Now I'd point out a couple other things. Elder Bednar has a great example where he talks about how the angel teaches. Father Lehi sees the vision. The angel is teaching Nephi. He's okay, let's ask some questions. He's going to say, look a lot, look. And then Nephi, you ask these questions, and I want you to look as an active process of how I'm teaching you. There is an incredible advantage of looking for things in your life. As this next week, we look for God's love. We look, for example, the mist of darkness. We look for the effects of the great and spacious building. We look for the word of God to help us identify all those. It's a beautiful, wonderful experience. Another thing you can look for as you study is particularly in chapters 13 and 14. Nephi is going to be outlined with help of the angel. Here are some fortifications that the Lord is giving for the last days. So in chapter 13, verse 23 is one. 39 and 40 is one. You'll see how God is fortifying us through these. Chapter 14 has a few. You'll see more. But God is planning fortifications for us today. And I want you to know that's real. He is blessing us and fortifying us against the evils of our day. Well, I hope that this has been a great week for you in your study as you studied some of the things that will lead you to God's love. One of which I hope you never forget is the temple. So some of the ideas I shared today for teaching and learning in chapters 11 to 14 is number 1, I hope you have a desire to know for yourself. I believe God will tell you to. Don't forget to ponder. In your life, be thinking of examples of the iron rod, the word of God, the love of God, temptations, things that may lead to harden your heart, and examples of pride or vain imaginations. Look for how the angel teaches. Another thing I hope is that you've learned, or we've emphasized today, is that there are fortifications that God has given us in our lives today to fortify us against the evils, against the mists of darkness, against the vain imaginations and pride of our day. I hope you have a great day. Thank you for spending some time with me as we've studied a little bit of the Book of Mormon. I will have all these quotes that I've used today on my little WordPress site, brotherrmiller.wordpress.com. Have a great day.